Okay, here we go with episode 2 of my project of making some videos of some of the chapters in the Storyworth book I compiled called A Collection of Mostly Accurate Family Stories. There it is right there. So this particular chapter, this essay, the prompt question they sent me was, what's one of the most beautiful places you've ever been? And here's what I wrote. I've been very fortunate to have visited some remarkable places. I've been to Niagara Falls a couple of times, and I could just stand there for hours staring mesmerized at all that rushing water. During those 2 trips to Western New York, I never felt compelled to climb into a barrel and go over the falls, nor did I have any interest in boarding the Maid of the Mist boat and getting soaked watching the falls from below. Watching from behind a rail high up was more than fine. What a sight. One time I traveled to Las Vegas for a business convention, and I brought Joyce with me on the trip. While there, we took a bus to visit the Grand Canyon. It was very stunning, and we didn't even go to the South Rim, which is the most spectacular part of the canyon. We went to the western side. It was still amazing. We went in late January, and the weather was bright and sunny, about 60 degrees. It was perfect. It was also rather crowded, with an endless stream of tourist buses coming in and out. I asked one of the rangers on duty if there were fewer tourists in the blistering hot summer months. He said no. There are just as many tourists when it's 115 degrees as when it's 60 degrees. He also pointed out that his main job during the summer is to pick up tourists who faint from dehydration. Since the air is so dry out in that desert region, when people sweat, the moisture immediately evaporates, so they don't realize how much bodily fluids they're losing. The next thing you know, bonk, they're flat on the ground, out cold, or rather, out hot. I remember the first time Joyce and I flew to Florida in January for vacation. We went one other time before that on our honeymoon in 1982. However, that was in May, and it was just as hot and sunny in Connecticut as it was in Orlando. That first time we visited Florida in January, the temperature was in the teens at Bradley Airport near Hartford, and it was dark and gloomy. When we arrived at Fort Myers, it was similar to Dorothy walking through the doorway of her house in the movie The Wizard of Oz. Suddenly, we went from a drab black and white world into vivid colors. We walked out of the airport and were hit by 75-degree air and the sight of flowers blooming everywhere. I'll never forget that feeling of overwhelming joy at that moment. And Joyce was even more joyful and overwhelmed than I was, since she loves flowers. We've been to Florida in the winter many times since then, and every vacation has been great. But I've never experienced that same sensation of pure happiness so powerfully as that very first time. The 3 different places I've just described are all beautiful, and I feel very fortunate to have been there in person. They each are certainly wonderful examples of natural beauty. However, I'd have to say that the most beautiful place I've ever been is entirely the result of mankind's efforts. The most beautiful place I've ever been to is Venice, Italy. It is completely mind-boggling that lovely cathedrals, churches, museums, opera houses, restaurants, public squares, hotels, apartment buildings, factories, banks, etc. were built on sandbars in a lagoon. Did you hear what I just said? They built the city on sandbars in a lagoon. If you think it's weird that Grace Slick and Starship sang, "We built this city on rock and roll," just think how weird it is to build a city on sandbars in a lagoon. And how the city was built is possibly more amazing than what was eventually built there. Way back in the 5th century, invaders from the north, including the famous Attila the Hun, were wreaking havoc in what is now northern Italy. So people migrated to the many sandbars and small islands in a shallow lagoon offshore. It was easy to defend this position, so the invaders left them alone. Over time, the people continued to build on these 126 little islands until it became a full-blown city, filled with canals connected by 472 bridges. Venice was its own independent city-state and developed into a wealthy and powerful center of commerce as maritime trade routes developed between Western Europe and the rest of the world. The really amazing part, in my mind, is that the Venetians sailed across the Adriatic Sea to Croatia, chopped down an estimated 10 million trees, cut off the branches, and transported them back to Venice on barges. These wooden poles were driven deep into the mud, side by side, to form the foundation on which the beautiful stone buildings were constructed. So the foundation of the city of Venice is a zillion trees pile-driven into the mud. Wow! Sometimes there is a fine line between genius and insanity, and I think the founding fathers of Venice, especially the architects and construction crews, danced back and forth across that fine line many times. Joyce and I were blessed to visit Venice when our daughter Mackenzie was married to Matteo Riendato in October of 2016. Matteo was from Padua, Italy, which is very close to Venice. We flew to Italy and stayed there for a week or so. On one occasion before the wedding, and then one time afterward, we took day trips to Venice. When we arrived by train that first day, we took a water taxi, which is just a motorboat with a taxi meter, along some canals and then to the Grand Canal and Piazza San Marco, or in English, St. Mark's Square. I videoed some of the brief water taxi journey with my iPhone, mostly because I just had to have a record, as I already knew that later on I wouldn't even believe my own eyes that I had enjoyed such an amazing experience. It was the most awe-inspiring 10-minute ride ever. I was just gawking at every sight. I felt like I was watching a movie, and in a movie, all at the same time. I'm not sure if it was more amazing than beautiful, or more beautiful than amazing, but I thought I might hyperventilate. For the first time, I understood the origin of the expression, "it takes your breath away." During both visits to Venice, I pretty much walked around all day with my mouth wide open, completely awestruck. I continued to say out loud, to no one in particular, "They built that church on a swamp. They built that opera house on a lagoon. How do you say, 'Are you freaking kidding me?' in Italian?" It's been over 7 years now since we visited Venice, and now actually it's been almost 10 years. We sure would like to go back again and see Matteo's family, and of course, see the breathtakingly beautiful floating city one more time. Okay, so that was that essay, and in the next episode, I'll read you something else. Thank you.